All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this virtual Steamin' Day. And just to quickly introduce myself, I've been a volunteer with the Marshall Steam Museum for 12 years now. And last year, I was lucky enough to join the board of the Friends of Auburn Heights. And then Allie asked me to moderate this, and I was happy to help out. So you're not really here to listen to me, you're here to listen to the folks on the panel. So I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, starting with Devin.
I'm Devin Hall. I've been volunteering with Auburn Heights since about 2013. Found out about it because my mom actually works for the state of Delaware, and she knew someone who introduced her to the program, and she knew how much I love old technology and would really enjoy working hands-on on steam cars. That's how I got involved.
All right, and then we'll go over to Tim.
Good morning. My name is Tim Ward, and I've been involved for about 10 years. I just decided one day to go to the annual meeting and see what it was. I kind of knew what it was about. I've known about it since the 70s when I used to ride my bike by the magic age of steam all the time, but never had gone in. So one day I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go find out what it is, and I've stayed around for 10 years.
All right, and then over to Steve.
Okay, I am president of the board. I've been a volunteer at Auburn Heights for 14 years, and I found the place through an article in the News Journal. I was retired and looking for something interesting to do, so on a weekend after Thanksgiving, I went over to see what the volunteers were like, and I was so impressed. I've been involved ever since. So I've really enjoyed my 14 years there.
Okay, and on another note, Steve was also my steam car driving instructor, and we have both survived to be here today, so that's a good thing. So for this next part, it's a little bit of an icebreaker. This is for everybody's participation, so you don't have to turn your video on, but if you want to use the hand clap, which we're going to say is a hand raise, for our purposes, you can participate in these as well. And so I just have a few things to ask you. If you want to raise your hand, and this is also for our panel, raise your hand if you have a picture of you driving a car in your house. Nobody. Oh, okay. Okay, we have a couple. All right, I have to raise my hand on that one as well. If you own an antique car or a car older than 25 years.
You own an antique car?
No, but I have a plasma car.
That's pretty cool. Now, Steve, I know you should have raised your hand on that one.
I'm
You can
looking
just
for the.
You can raise your actual hand because you're on video.
Okay, that's good.
If you work on a car at your home.
I trying to avoid it, but I've been having to.
If you own multiple antique car hats or T-shirts. All right. If you have been to at least 2 other car museums besides the Marshall Steam Museum. All right. If you don't understand why anybody would want a self-driving car.
You don't understand.
Yeah. Driving's fun. I mean, the whole point. And then if you have ever been on a car tour. All right. So now we'll head into the questions for our panel. And so I'll go to Devin and then Tim and then Steve. What do you do as a volunteer, and what projects had you been working on before we had to kind of stop volunteering for everybody's safety?
So I'm one of the Model T drivers, so I do that during events. And then during the weeknights, I work on whatever projects are going on. So I don't really have a specific project that I've worked on. I more or less help out with some of the other ones that are going on those nights.
All right. Tim?
I haven't been extremely active for the last year and a half or 2 years, but prior to that, I mean, much of our time is spent getting cars ready for events and, repairing things over the winter that you've neglected, and patched back together. I mean, a lot of it is getting cars ready for, the next drive. So.
All right. And Steve.
Well, my biggest efforts recently, and this goes back to November, we started a project to renovate our museum, and we had to find a place for all the cars. That's 20 of them. We put 4 of them at Auburn Heights, 1 at Winterthur, and 13 of them over in a warehouse in Newcastle. So we drove them all over, and now I have to get them all back. So that's what I've been doing.
All right. Where did your love of older automobiles come from? We'll go back to Devin.
I've always liked knowing how things worked, and I've always liked older technology, stuff that before everything was ran by a computer, we could actually see all the parts that make something work. And so older cars, they fall into that. Cars today, a lot of them are run by computers, and the steam cars and Model T are just great examples of purely mechanical operation.
All right. Tim, same question.
I guess it's the fact that, growing up that you could actually work on a car and understand how it works. I guess my love of cars is more associated with the history around them than the car itself. I wouldn't really consider myself a car person, although I've spent an awful lot of time under them. Many days it was just to get it, get to school or to work or whatever. But, it's the history of them is very interesting, the whole industry.
And Steve.
Well, I've always been interested in cars. I have a 1969 Corvette that I used to work on before I got so involved in the steam cars. I've spent a lot of time at Auburn Heights now, learning to drive, getting familiar with the cars. And like Devin, I think it's just amazing that you can drive a 100-year-old car and everything is mechanical. You always understand what's going on, and there's no mystery, computer intervening. I own a truck right now that the transmission doesn't work because the electronics are screwed up, and there's nothing I can do to fix it. So it's going to go back to Ford, and they have had so many problems with this truck. It's 7 years old that they've extended the warranty to 10 years. So it's not my problem anymore. But I like working on the steam cars.
All right. All right. So if you could each show us your favorite piece of automobile memorabilia that you own. So we'll go over to Devin.
I don't actually own any automobile memorabilia. Despite obviously the collection of older equipment I have behind me with the radio and cameras, nothing owns automobile. But I do find the headlights that are on the cars, the acetylene generators, very cool.
All right, Tim, how about you?
Again, I don't really collect automobile memorabilia, but I inherited a 1956 Volkswagen Beetle from my aunt, and I have the original owner's manual that came with it, in amazingly good condition. So I've hung on to that. It's not so much the car, but all the memories of, that happened in that car in California, driving it, to Disneyland in the 60s and in the 70s up and down the coast of California. The car went to Texas in the 80s and came back to South Bethany Beach in the 90s before I ended up with it. So I have all those memories of all the things I did in that car, which make it important to me more than anything.
So maybe the car is your favorite piece of automobile memorabilia then.
It's the memories in the history with it, the things that we all did as a family. So
Fair enough. How about you, Steve?
Okay, my first car was a 1933 Dodge that I owned with a friend of mine from high school. And I still have the key, and you can see it here. It's got a hook in it. It's pretty unusual. I looked online to see what this thing was worth, and what I found was I could buy an uncut blank of the same key from a 1933 Chrysler for 20 bucks. So it's not worth a lot, but I could cut a new one tomorrow. And the lock cylinder in the car was pretty unusual in that it had a slide cover that allowed you to put this bent key into the ignition and turn it. So it's pretty unique. I've kept it all these years.
All right. All right, if you could each tell us about a tricky repair you had to make while volunteering at Auburn Heights. So we'll go to Devin first.
I can tell you that changing a tire on Model T is not as easy as it looks. It's certainly much more difficult than changing tires today. Actually getting the tire off the rim and off the car is not an easy task, and it took us a few people and a few days worth to do that.
All right. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I guess the where I had my back against the wall the most was on my very first tour when we were having problems with the steam automatic that regulates the steam pressure in the boiler and very much influences the kind of day you're going to have. And we decided to bypass it and drive strictly by the gauge. So I borrowed parts from Kelly, who happened to bring along a lot of spare plumbing parts, and we bypassed the automatic and got through the rest of our tour. So, but that had to work. So that was a tricky repair.
All right. And how about you, Steve?
Well, I will second Devin's opinion on changing a tire. Many of our cars have spare tires on them, and I remember telling Tom that if I was ever on a tour out away from Auburn Heights and I got a flat tire, I was going to go get the trailer. I was not about to change it on the road, and he found that pretty funny because he would always fight the car, and he prided himself in always being able to get the car back home. I don't have such pride. I would go get the trailer. I think my most interesting repair was on a tour. I had a car that I know pretty well, and it started leaking before we left for the day, and it was leaking water. And the leak just kept getting bigger and bigger, and by the time I got to the first water stop, the tank was empty. So I filled it up again, and water was pouring out, and I used a GPS to go the shortest possible route back to the hotel, and we tried to use the metal worker who had been recommended to us by the tour sponsor, and he told me he really wasn't interested in that job. So the teeny bopper who was working the desk at the motel heard me talking to him, and she said, "What are you looking for?" And she sent me to a guy who was building a aluminum sailboat mast, and he was happy to fix the car the same day, turn the tank around for $100, and we ran the car that night. So that was one of those, you really want to not fail in front of 50 other people. And we continued on the tour the very next day.
All right. Nice. So maybe a happier memory now. If you could tell us about a memorable steaming day experience.
I don't know if there's any one particular experience for me, but as a Model T driver, it's always exciting to give people rides in such an iconic car, and their reaction, how much they just love that. That's always, it's one of my favorite parts of the steaming day. It's always so much fun.
All right. How about you, Tim?
First day I drove the mountain wagon, giving rides. Will not forget that. Fired it up, and you're responsible for I don't know, a dozen or so people, and you don't want to wreck the car, you don't want to run over anyone, and all people do is walk in front of you the whole time. So that was a stressful but enjoyable day. So glad I got to do it. Very glad.
Right. And Steve?
Well, my most vivid memory is not a good thing. Jerry Lucas, who's moved to Colorado and is no longer a volunteer, was one of our better drivers, and he was driving the Gentleman Speedy Roadster, which is a 1908 car, and we had spent many years rebuilding the engine on that car, and we always thought the Stanleys were pretty good at putting things together, but what we discovered was they never made any two things really alike. And the engine cover that we put on the rebuild engine was the same one that had come off a different engine, and it was slightly smaller. So the steam chest in the car can get up to 400 or 500 pounds of pressure, and this thing was not, the threads were not fully engaged, the cap on the steam chest. So it blew off in the middle of the steaming day and went right through the engine case. It made the loudest bang, and I really thought something had exploded. And there was fiberglass insulation all over the place in the air, and we had to retire the car, but as it turned out, it was not a big deal because there was no damage to speak of. The noise was all the release of the steam pressure, and the insulation was just because we bent the heck out of the engine case, which was copper, and we straightened it up and put it back together with the right cap on it, and it's been running ever since.
I remember that boom. It was quite exciting.
Yeah, we thought surely somebody had gotten hurt, and nobody had. It was completely innocuous, but really, really spectacular.
All right. If you could please tell us about a favorite driving experience in one of the cars in the collection.
I think for me, it would be the first time when I was learning to drive any of the cars was taking it out on the road off the property, and actually getting to really drive it. That's probably one of my favorite memories of volunteering and learning to drive.
All right, great. Thank you, Devin. How about you, Tim?
Again, it has to do with the mountain wagon. It may have been coming back from Perkins on our end of season tour, and Tom put me in the driver's seat, and I had been driving that long of the mountain wagon with a load of people on it, and said, "You're going to drive home today." So that was definitely a memorable drive. So
Tim, your most memorable drive was not the time we were stuck in the 735 in the rain for several hours?
That would have been the second, but I was saying it wasn't the day we were stuck in the rain and got to Chestertown at 11 p.m. The next day after we got the car fixed, I probably had some of the nicest drives around Chestertown when the car was working right. So that would have been a very positive, fortunately the tour had a positive end to it. So. Yeah.
And Dan, yes. I just unmuted Kelly because I think he probably has something to add to that experience.
Yes, I was going to say, And we're indebted to Kelly because he came back in a different car to help us out, and then he got stuck in the rain with us. So
Yeah.
Yes, that was a long diagnosis event there.
But it was the weekend turned out fine. I
It
think
did.
I think for everyone. So it could have ended like that, Kelly.
I was lucky. I arrived after all the work and I just got to enjoy the drive
That's
next day.
Yeah, and we made it in time with 5 minutes to spare to order pizza that night. So.
yeah.
So Steve, how about your favorite driving experience in one of the cars?
I think my favorite experience was on a tour in Berks County. We did not go on the steam car tour that year, and so this one is sponsored by one of the gas car clubs, and they don't care about water stops for steam cars. So we were pretty much on our own, and I saw a guy cutting down a tree with a chainsaw, and I thought, well, this guy's got to have a hose. So I pulled into his driveway, and he was happy to give me water, and I've never had anybody refuse me water. Then, you know, they're always happy to mess with a car like that. And he asked me what it burned for fuel, and I told him kerosene. And he said, well, I've got some kerosene here left over from the winter. Do you want it? And so I got 5 gallons of free kerosene with my water. And that was a really nice water stop.
All right. And what was the hardest part of driver training for each of you?
So I first started learning to drive a steam car, and there's a lot of things to pay attention to when you drive a steam car. And then I learned to drive a Model T. And the throttle on the cars are in the same spot, but they're backwards. So to accelerate in a steam car, move the lever in the same direction as to decelerate in a Model T. And I know I stalled out the Model T more than once by making that mistake.
Well, more power to you, because I tried the Model T, and I think I'm sticking with the steam car. So that was a bit too much for me. But how about you, Tim?
I guess it comes down to, you have to water management and steam pressure. So I guess learning to drive and keep the steam pressure up high enough that you're not hobbling yourself is it's a little tough, especially in the beginning, to realize how long it takes to build steam again. And but you also, the flip side is having to manage the water and make sure you don't, it was always stressed that you're not pumping water while you're going up a hill and using steam. So, but yes, there are little things you learn. So once you kind of get the idea about, those two things, it wasn't that hard. You do have a lot to pay attention to, though.
And how about you, Steve?
Well, I think I learned to drive a steam car from Tom Marshall when he was around. And the hardest thing about that was you really didn't want to disappoint the guy. But the trip I really remember was when we went to the grand opening of the Wilmington and Western after they'd been shut down after the hurricane. And our role was to place ourselves along the route. And I was over by Ashland Nature Center, where the track crosses Barley Mill Road. And my role was to blow the whistle there. And there were all kinds of cars on the road because they were watching the train. And Tom was behind me in his Prius, and I went up that hill across the track to make a left turn. And I saw him in the rearview mirror behind me, and I was sweating it pretty good, trying to keep the car on the hill and make a smooth start and make that left turn in front of the traffic to go back to Auburn Heights. And when we got back to Auburn Heights, he said, well, that was pretty good. And I told him, I said, Tom, I said, I saw you behind me, And that's as good as I could have done it. And I said, you know, if you found anything to criticize me for, I couldn't do it better. And he again found that very humorous. So, yeah, making Tom laugh was quite an accomplishment.
And then I see we have a question from the audience that directly relates to that question, which is how long does it take to get licensed to drive a steam car? And since Steve is one of our instructors, I'll throw that one to him.
Well, it depends on the person a lot. We have a fairly detailed listing of the qualification levels, and there's beginner, intermediate, and full steam car driver, and then teacher. At the beginner level, you always have to be out with an instructor. At the intermediate level, we will let 2 intermediates drive a car without an instructor, but together. And the theory there is that one guy, the one intermediate who's not driving is watching the driver and keeps him from making mistakes. We used to have miles of distance as a way of gauging experience, but we've kind of given up on that. And now it's basically the judgment of the teacher. And I think Kelly's one of our teachers, and Kelly's probably been more rigorous than the miles accumulation would result. So I think that's a better way to do it.
Yeah, and just to clarify, there is no specific license to drive a steam car in Delaware. So you have to have a regular driver's license, and then it's incumbent upon the person learning to work with the instructors at the Marshall Steam Museum once you are in the driver training program. And then there's a follow-up to that question, which we'll come back to after we get to our last panel question. So I don't want you to think we're ignoring that follow-up. So back to for the final panel question, which is your favorite car in the collection and why?
I don't really have a favorite car. It goes back to just, I love being able to work on and drive some of the, antique cars, purely mechanical, and yeah, I don't really have a favorite.
All right. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, I have to second that with Devin. I mean, I've had a lot of fun in all the cars, including the Model T. I've been a Model T driver on and off over the years, and it's a very unique experience driving and starting and running that car. So, yeah, they all, it's an experience with all of them. So it's just being able to have that experience is the biggest part. I'd say that's the most satisfying thing.
All right. And Steve?
Well, everybody around Auburn Heights knows that the Model 76 is my favorite car. And part of the reason for that is that I learned on that car. And it's a special car because it was the first car in the collection. It's a 1913 car, which means it's kind of in the midpoint of the heyday of the Stanleys. And I think it's the best looking car in the collection because it's not painted a Stanley color. Clarence Marshall liked a dark green, and that's the color it is. He liked brass, and properly painted, that car would have black headlamps, and this car has plain brass headlamps. But I think it's the best proportioned car in the collection and probably the best looking. So it's my favorite. And the other thing I'll say about it, as I drive it so much that every car, every steam car at least, has its own personality, and I know this car really well. So when something's not right, I generally know it.
And I've been restraining myself from answering any of these questions since I've been the moderator, but I want to jump in on this one. And while I like most of the cars in the collection for different reasons, and I have different connections to different ones, I have to say the Model EX which was one of the most popular, or it was the most popular model that the Stanleys produced, which is in this collection is a 1908, is my favorite car. When it is running well, because it can be, as Steve said, it has its own personality, and sometimes it's a little finicky. And to be fair, it's 112 years old, so I think it has a right to be. But when it is running well, it is the nicest drive you will have. It has some quirks of its own, and even when it's not running well, you get to learn something. So that car's a lot of fun. Plus, it makes it a lot easier. It's so light, one person can push it and steer it out of the museum at the same time, which is always a plus. So, so we have a chance for questions here from the audience, and I want to get back to the one that was asked earlier. And the question was, do we offer courses to learn to drive in conjunction with being a volunteer? This particular person lives in Vermont, and how much of a time commitment are we looking for? So I don't know, Steve, do you want to take that one, or?
I'd be happy to take that one. One of the things that we expect out of volunteers who are interested in driving is that they show some mechanical aptitude. And the way we judge that is by asking them to work on the cars during volunteer work sessions. And then if they show an appreciation for the car and an understanding of how it works, we will enroll them in the training under an instructor like Kelly. And the only real requirement beyond that is that they continue to do the work sessions and that they agree that they're obligated to drive the cars when we have events and when we go off site.
All right, and did that answer the question sufficiently? All right. And then another question came in, is the museum pursuing enlarging the number of steam cars? And so who wants to jump in on that one?
Probably the best qualified person to answer that. In my opinion as president is that we don't have enough money to buy a steam car. It's pretty hard to get a really desirable steam car for less than $200,000. But we are more than willing to accept an inheritance or a donation of a car. I know if Susan's listening, she'll tell me that we don't have anywhere to put it, but I'm thinking if we got another one, we'd find a home for it. And there you are, Susan.
That's pretty true.
I brought you back to life.
What he said.
And I think Kelly had something to add there.
Oh,
you got muted again. Hold on.
I was just going to say you could keep it in my house. We have considered a little bit the value if we could receive a donation of a modern built stand, a reproduction car, so that we would have that to really pound on with driver training, rather than having to use our beloved artifacts for driver training, which hasn't been a problem. But if we could switch that kind of wear over to a newer car, that would be great. We haven't worked too hard in that direction, but I think it would be something we definitely consider.
To Kelly's point, about half of the Stanley steam cars out there are modern built replicas that use many original parts. And our collection is almost exclusively original cars. So his point is well taken that we would value an accurately rebuilt modern rendition of a Stanley for driver training.
And Kelly, since you are unmuted right now, I'll also ask you, what's your favorite car in the collection?
I spent a lot of time with the 607 I enjoy that, and that's kind of special too because that was the first car that Tom bought for himself. But I think my favorite car might be the Model H5, which I've only driven about 3 feet. But it's a design that was it was kind of a sports car. Even though it's that early, it has an excellent power to weight ratio. Its weight distribution is really good, so it handles well. And we've been working lately to get that car back on the road. I'm looking forward to spending more time with that.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Does anybody else in the audience have any questions? You can share them via chat. Yes.
So I'm Chris. I'm kind of excited by steam cars in general. I've got a little 33 American Austin. But a modern, like, I've seen Lycomobiles that are a knockoff of the old Locomobile that are very reasonably priced, like 20 or 30 grand. Fundraisers on your association could be considered to raise the funds to buy something like that. That might be a good training car for your purposes, is a thought.
All right, thank you.
Do you have much association with Mr. Borden in Woodstock?
Yes, we do. He's a member, and we've bought a number of boilers from him.
Right, that's certainly his specialty. Good, and it was his father that was quite an eccentric user of his Stanleys, right?
Right, and we have at least one car that was bought from his father.
Nice.
And many of us have bought his maple syrup as well.
You're right.
Well, it's made in the right state, so you've gotten the real stuff. So when do you have workshops, gatherings, maintenance?
We have Tuesday evening and Wednesday afternoon.
Okay. Of every week?
Yes.
Wow.
We haven't had one since March.
I was going to say, except for right now.
Oh.
But we're just
I can
getting
see
started.
that very much.
We're thinking about restarting, but we need to get the cars back first.
It's true. And do you have a Marriott replica, the bullet down on Daytona Beach?
No, we don't.
Not yet. Yeah. Well, it's very exciting. It's quite a. Stanley was the what got me interested in antique cars when I was a little kid. I saw some of the videos of the marshals that were interested when they were very young. I had a somewhat similar experience. I went to an antique car show my grandfather took me to in Belltown, the East Hampton Belltown Auto Show in the 60s. And it was still held in the principal part of town. It was very hilly. And it stuck in my mind. There was a yellow 1906 Stanley that was climbing those hills, full speed ahead, not a worry in the world, and everybody got out the way because it was moving. And that stuck in my head and made me think, wow, old vehicles running well. And since I was bitten by the bug, and I just can't get rid of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just want to see if there are any other questions. I know we're running a little over time, but that's okay because I think everybody, has had some questions and has been interested. So we're good, Allie. I'm not fired as the moderator. All right. So just want to give a chance for any other questions or comments.
I'm actually going to unmute unless anyone has an immediate question. Jeff, we have a few volunteers that are lurking on this program, and Jeff is one of our enthusiastic volunteers. I just wanted him to weigh in if he had any favorite cars or just favorite things. If he lets me unmute him.
Okay, Al, you got it. I have to say, I really don't have a favorite car. All my favorite memories and times at Auburn Heights are pretty much the people and our guests and seeing everybody leave with a smile. If somebody didn't have a good time, it wasn't for our lack of trying. But I've got one favorite guest that I think I met when he was 3 years old. I think he's 7 or 8 now, and he still comes running over to say hi to Mr. Jeff. So, I mean, not a favorite car, but it's, it's those memories that just keep things going. It keeps me coming back.
I will add that Jeff is my favorite mountain wagon loader. He's really good at it, and he keeps them coming back.
Guess I have to send you a Christmas card this year, huh?
That's true.
I really can't wait to have this whole virus mess over with so we can get things back in track and running again. I truly miss my fellow volunteers. A couple weeks ago, I stopped by and I saw Susan and I saw Steve, and it was like, oh my gosh, I've seen friends that I haven't seen in 20 years. And, it's only been a couple months, but I'm really looking forward to this being over with so we can hit the ground running again. It won't, unfortunately, it's probably not going to be back to what it was anytime soon, but I really want to see people back on site. A bunch of other people are raising their hands.
Jerry, we're going to start with you, then Kelly, and then the other gentleman.
Okay, thank you. As a participant in the way of audience, I just wanted to tell you how remarkable I think you're doing with the preservation not only of a wonderful car collection, but also a mansion. I think that we would be certainly sad if you weren't doing this. And I know it sounds like you're having a great time for yourself doing it, but I just want to reflect what great hosts you are and what a wonderful job you're doing.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you for that.
Kelly, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on what Jeff said. What has brought me there is the steam cars, because I've been really interested in steam cars since I was a kid. And the entire rest of the Auburn Heights operation has not kind of drawn me as much as those have. But I've been there and I've been involved, and one of the things that has struck me is that is the amount of enthusiasm people come to visit us have for coming to visit us. People, like Jeff's story, and there are a lot of other stories like that of people who have just come back and they love it, and that's something that those people are not making up. That's honest. They had a great time. When I'm there on a Steamin' Sunday and volunteering, it's very satisfying just to help people have a great time. So I think that's something that is really powerful about the Auburn Heights organization is what it has done for all these people who come to visit us.
And I will put Susan on the spot for a second, which I'm sure she'll get me back for later. Susan, what's your favorite car in the collection?
The green one.
I had a feeling that was going to be the answer.
I'm alluding to my first experience when I confused 2 green cars, which happened more than 10 years ago, and I've not been allowed to forget it. But I do love both of those green cars, so.
We use that to keep her in her place.
Yeah, they do. But if you're gonna have a little faux pas, make it a dramatic one, and I did.
Susan's place is every place.
Yeah.
We had another question from, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correct, Charter or Chartier?
Oh, my name is Chris. Chartier.
Chris, go ahead with your question.
I don't know what it was.
Well, I have one last question because, well, actually, one of my favorite cars, which I have not actually gotten to ride in, is the Roush and Lang, which is our electric car. And I didn't know if anybody here could speak on it, or just give it a little love, or if you've driven in it. I would just love just to share a little bit about this car that sometimes we forget about.
I guess I can jump in there. I guess I'm technically still a Roush and Lang driver. It's been several years since I've driven it, but it was the first car I was qualified to drive, and it was the first car I drove at a Steamin' Day. And that was actually in 2008 when we were giving additional rides in the cars that were turning 100 years old. So my first day was the highest, my first day driving in front of the public was the highest attended day we had that year, with extra cars giving rides, and it was people everywhere. So it was a little nerve-wracking at first, but I really do like the Roush and Lang. It's nice and quiet, so when you're going around, it's easy to pay attention to where you're going, but then also tell people about the car. And it's sort of like a little mini parlor on the inside. So I'm not the tallest person, so I have to make sure the tall people don't sit in front of me because the driver sits in the back seat. So the taller people have to sit next to me, not in front of me, so I can actually see. And it has a tiller steer, so you have to make sure you don't have too much ice cream that day, or else you can't make a right turn because the tiller comes into you for the right turns. It is certainly not the fastest car, but I did get to drive it to an outside event up in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania one day, and it was funny because there were lots of hills. We were going on back roads just to be safe. Left plenty of time in advance because it was about a 10-mile drive. And as I was going up a particularly steep hill at full speed in the Roush and Lang, somebody jogged past me. And so up the hill, just jogging past me. And I went, okay, that's fine. Got to the top of the hill. The jogger's, a distance ahead of me now. And downhill, that car is nice and speedy because it's very heavy. And so I went just right by the jogger, and I went, okay, now we're even, we're good. And so I just thought, okay, yeah, that's a fun experience with somebody jogging past you when you're going flat out. Unfortunately, one of the Packards in the collection was stuck behind me at that point, and I don't think he ever got out of first gear. So, so it is not a speedy car, but it is a nice car to drive, as long as you're not going too far.
Thank you, guys. So we do have another question from Jill. I muted Jill, but she asked, how fast can the steam cars go?
It depends on the steam car. We have one that's easily a 70 or 80 mile an hour car, if you're nutty enough to drive it that fast. And I had an experience driving a steam car 70, and I lost my hat. So not something you do lightly.
And everybody, I'm sure you all remember the history about Daytona Beach. Marriott had the land speed record with the steamer. Was it 127? He was clocked and blew up on the beach.
Right.
At a turn. So steamers can go. They deserve our respect.
Did that answer your question, Jill? Do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I was just wondering. No seatbelt, so I just wondered how fast they'd go.
Well, I tell people when they ask about the no seatbelt thing that if I wreck one, I really don't want to survive.
Jill is also Devin's mother. So
I was not going to embarrass her and say that.
I'll do it for her.
Sweet.
All right. Any other final questions or comments from the crowd? I will unmute the rest if anyone has any final things they want to say. If not, Dan, anything?
I just want to thank Allie and Susan for all their hard work making a virtual Steamin' Day possible. So thank you both for everything you've been doing during the whole pandemic and also especially today. So thank you both.
Yeah. Well, everyone's doing the hands, so I'll just say a big thanks for being here. And if you want to say a thanks to all our volunteers, both for joining in and for participating today. we appreciate you all so much, and you make our events happen. So
Thank you for an informative meeting. I was glad to meet some of you all. Actually, glad to meet you all. I look forward to further association.
Well, we hope to see you down here one day.
Can't wait. I will not drive my American Austin that far.
all right, thanks everybody. Have
Thank
a good
you.
rest of your
Thank you.
weekend.
Take care. Be safe.
Happy
Take care of your
Steamin' Day.
families.